So I'm going to do this a little differently. I'm the CEO of Indigo Agriculture. I've only got one slide on Indigo, and I'll start with that. Mostly as to develop credibility that we're actually building an innovative company in agriculture. Indigo is about 4 years old now. We were started in 2014 by an incubator in Cambridge, Massachusetts called Flagship. We've grown to about 350 employees today. Our headquarters and R&D is based in Boston. That's a thoughtful approach. If you want to be world-class in microbiology, Boston is a really good place to have your head of R&D. However, it's a long way from customers, and so our U.S. commercial operations are all based here in Memphis. We also have offices in RTP, where we do a little more R&D, and then we have commercial offices in Brazil, Argentina, and Australia. We've raised about $400 million in the last 4 years. We have commercial products in 5 crops: corn, wheat, soy, cotton, and rice. And we have remarkable customer traction, or commercial traction. So we really had no commercial activities in 2016. Everything leading up to that was all based on R&D. Last year, we had about $67 million in booked revenue. This year, we expect to do over $500 million. So before I get to the topic, I'll give a little bit of background on me. I'm originally from Arkansas. I grew up on a farm in South Arkansas near Magnolia. We had corn and cows, and we sold fertilizer to the local farmers. I then went to high school in Harrison, home of the Fighting Goblins. I studied chemistry and chemical engineering at the University of Tulsa. Spent 5 years in an oil refinery at Exxon, which is pretty close to the least glamorous job you've ever heard of. If you're ever in an interview and they mention that you need to wear fire retardant coveralls to work, you should ask more questions. 5 years was enough of that. I went to Harvard Business School and got an MBA, and really with the intention of starting or getting involved in a startup company when I graduated. And that's what I've been doing ever since. So for the last 20 years, my profession, such that it is starting and running high-tech companies. That started with Chemdex. I wrote the business plan for Chemdex in business school in 1997. Started that right out of school and got lucky and caught the wave of the internet at that point. At one point, Chemdex was the fastest company in history to reach a $10 billion market cap. I was 30 and had no idea what I was doing. We sold that in 2001. 2002, I started Anacor Pharmaceuticals, a brand new way of using boron chemistry to develop drugs. Took Anacor public in 2010. Pfizer bought Anacor for $5.2 billion a couple of years ago. And then in parallel with Indigo, I also have a startup in San Francisco called Better Therapeutics. The idea of using digital tools as opposed to traditional pharmaceuticals, using digital tools to reverse and treat disease. And we're showing efficacy similar to drugs in diabetes and heart disease, high blood pressure, et cetera, with no pharmaceuticals at all. And that's still an earlier stage company. So I spent sort of the previous 20 years starting and running companies in digital technology and biotechnology. Why agriculture? Well, one is it's one of the most important industries in the world, if not the most important. It certainly protects against more disease than all of the drug company innovations put together. It employs 40% of the global workforce. It supports over $3 trillion worth of value, and it's really the basis on which successful economies operate and sustains everybody on Earth. So it's obviously important. There are significant challenges here as well, and everybody in the room would probably be able to name most of these. One is that we're losing farmland every year. So through a combination of industrial pollution and farming practices, we lose hundreds of thousands of acres of farmland every year. Two is we're using more resources than the planet can replenish, and that's especially true in water. So we're drawing down every year about 30% more water than the planet is replenishing in the form of lakes and aquifers. And about 70% of the freshwater use on the planet comes from agriculture. So you can't really solve the agriculture problem without addressing, or solve the water problem without addressing agriculture. Farming impacts water quality, both local water quality in terms of the chemicals and nitrogen that are used, as well as runoff. The planet's getting warmer. Regardless of whether you think that's man-made or not, it's definitely happening, and warmer weather will decrease productivity of agriculture in general. Some places it's good. If you're a wheat farmer in Canada, warmer is probably better. But most of our food is grown in regions where warmer temperatures are going to cause more problems than they solve. And then finally, we produce a huge amount of greenhouse gases in the process of growing the food that feeds the planet. So I started looking for things to do in this area. That included writing business plans, talking to anybody who would talk to me, looking technologies to license, companies to start, et cetera. And found this little startup in Cambridge, Massachusetts that was focused on using microbiology, or the plant microbiome, to improve the yield and quality of crops. It was 13 people at the time, but I thought it was the most, I guess I still do, think it was the most interesting combination of technology and unmet need I'd ever seen. You've heard earlier today in the program about the human microbiome and the plant microbiome, and I'll just say that, coming out of the human health side, this resonated with me. I understood what was going on the human microbiome side, and the idea of taking the microbes that evolved to be in plants over hundreds of millions of years and that have been removed by agricultural practices, largely the application of fungicides, and taking natural microbes, adding them back to plants in a way of improving yields and decreasing the amount of fertilizers and chemicals used seemed like a really attractive base on which to establish an innovative company in agriculture. One of the first things I realized when I got to ag is that there weren't very many other people doing this. There are some really innovative companies in this room, but when you compare the size of this room to the amount of innovation that's going on in our sister industries, in software technology or human health and biotechnology, there's probably 2 orders of magnitude difference. I mean, think about the number of companies that get created in tech every day. These are household names in Google and WeWork and Uber and Facebook. And the same on the biotechnology side, where we've created tens of billions of dollars of value. We don't have that same experience of technology fundamentally changing the industry as we do in those and almost all of these. One might say that agriculture is the largest industry in the world that has not yet been disrupted by technology. It's not because the technology doesn't exist. The same technologies are applicable. The increased computing power, the decreased cost of DNA sequencing, increased networking, all of those things are driving enormous changes in these other industries and have not yet changed agriculture. It seems inevitable, however. Probably part of the reason that change hasn't happened yet is shown here. First is consolidation on the input side. Ag is really based today on 4 technologies: fertilizer, ag chemicals, plant breeding, and GMOs. And those technologies are controlled by, used to be 6, about to be 3 or 4 big input companies, and about the same number of farm retailers. Well, if you've built your business on those technologies, you're probably going to be reluctant to invest in or embrace a technology that might make those technologies less important. And what we see over and over in ag is, promising technology companies get started, and then they reach a point at which they get acquired for a little, maybe up to several $100 million. But we haven't really seen the breakthrough of these technologies sort of fundamentally reshaping industries in agriculture yet, like they are in other companies, other industries. So I think that's a really important reason, but I think number 3 may be even more important. It's that there's no way to tell, no way for farmers to tell what technologies work. If you think about other high science industries, human health, drug development, the FDA sets the terms under which trials are done, and they're a total pain in the ass. But when an FDA-sponsored trial is concluded and a company announces we did a phase 3 trial and here are the results, everybody believes the results. They might quibble about stuff around the edges, but for the most part, the drug either worked or it didn't work. There's no analogy to that in ag. Every technology company runs their own sponsored trials, and for the most part, nobody believes them. Including even other companies. I see press releases all the time of X showed a 15% yield improvement, and I think BS. Maybe it did, but I need a whole bunch more understanding about how that trial was run to know if that's true or not. And so if a farmer is approached by 10 companies a year that say, hey, I've got something that can improve your yield 5 or 10%, and maybe even a couple of them are telling the truth, the farmer has no way of telling which ones are which. And so the most obvious thing to do would be to not buy any of them. And that really slows the adoption of new technologies. And then finally, number 4, Matt and others have mentioned this, but today most agriculture is a commodity. And if you're producing a commodity, you get paid for volume, and you don't typically get paid for sustainability or quality. And so innovations that can improve sustainability and quality have a hard time getting taken up. Reducing chemical use or reducing fertilizer use is certainly worthwhile. It has some immediate benefit to the farmer because it decreases their input costs. They don't have to buy those things. But if by doing that, that farmer could also garner a premium for the crop they're producing, if they got paid more for using less fertilizer or fewer chemicals, then we would really drive the adoption of these innovations that drive quality and sustainability. And so that's what Indigo is seeking to do. Really trying to innovate across the entire supply chain. We think in order to solve this problem, you have to solve all of those problems. You have to connect the farmer with the buyer of their crop, which reduces some cost, but it also allows the buyer to get exactly what they want and allows the farmer for the first time to connect with what that buyer wants and perhaps produce a higher quality crop, a value-added crop where they can get higher margins than they're able to enjoy today. And you've got to take that all the way back to the input side so that you can select inputs that allow farmers to be able to achieve that. You've got to give them microbes that allow them to use less nitrogen or fewer chemicals, and give them data sciences that allows them to make better choices about those things. And then perhaps the reason that the current agricultural industry hasn't really solved the problems I described earlier is because it's organized vertically, and that the solution, by definition, needs to be horizontal. That at least is Indigo's hypothesis. I realize it's a really big swing, and the outcome is not yet determined. We're endeavoring to take on something that if we're successful, will have a real positive impact in the world and allow us to build a big company. But it's also expensive and complicated, and that you don't do that lightly. To do it well, you've got to do two things. You've got to have a really strong team. So we're only a 4-year-old company, but we've put together a leadership team that looks like a Fortune 100 company. With the idea being we're trying to hire the leaders today that we think can run the company we want to be 5 years from now. That leadership team includes Paul Dacier, who's our general counsel. He served in the same role at the technology company EMC for 26 years before they were sold to Dell for $68 billion. Jeff Poulton is our CFO. We hired him from Shire, where he was also the CFO, a publicly traded biotech company with a market cap of about $60 billion. Frank Crespo was the chief procurement officer at Caterpillar. There he annually bought about $28 billion worth of supplies across 140 countries. He's our chief supply chain officer. And Barry Knight, who's here in the room, runs Indigo Partners and was head of commercial for us. And he before this ran the farm retail chain, Jimmy Sanders. So I don't think you get to take on big opportunities without being able to depend on a team that can execute across that full chain. And that's what we're trying to do here. The other thing you've got to do is raise a whole bunch of money. There's no way to sort of solve these problems cheaply. We have a complex solution. It requires a lot of investment to put it in place. So we've looked to both raise the money and raise money from deep-pocketed investors who are going to be able to continue to invest. So Flagship is our founding investor. We also have the Alaska Permanent Fund, who's invested about $75 million to date. This is a $55 billion fund that invests the oil and gas royalties on behalf of the Alaskan citizens. The Investment Corporation of Dubai, which is about a $220 billion fund. And we found that people in the Middle East are especially focused on food security, so they view this as both a financial investment and a strategic one. Bally Gifford is a Scottish mutual fund of about $210 billion. Same idea, plenty of money to follow on behind. And a lot of our money, over $100 million of it, has come from wealthy individuals and family offices. People who not only want to make money, but want to do positive things in the world and make a difference. And those have been strong supporters for us as well. So I'll conclude with this slide and 3 thoughts for building an innovative company in agriculture. The first is a mistake that I think lots of entrepreneurs make, and it's that they think, well, I'll do something small because that will reduce execution risk. If I define it, pretty narrowly, that'll make it easier to accomplish. And in some ways, I'm sure that's true. It does decrease complexity. But the opposite can be true, too. Big visions attract people who want to do big things and investors who are interested in investing a significant amount of money for a significant return. And in some ways, I think by charting out a bigger vision, it's possible that you're actually reducing execution risk because it allows you to attract more money and better people. The second one is something that Indigo is committed to and we know we can't do on our own. Great technology is not sufficient here. I think agriculture has seen a number of really interesting technology companies over the last 10 years that have been constrained by the ecosystem. It's not enough to be a great technology company. You have to solve the business model problem so that you can maximize the value of that technology. And then finally, what a good time to be trying to solve all these things. The consolidation of the input companies, pushback from consumers on existing technologies, the emergence of new technologies like microbiology and data sciences, and the fact that farming is not a very economically attractive proposition right now, which makes many farmers more willing to experiment. It seems like an almost optimum time to build something that fundamentally reshapes agriculture. And I look forward to doing all that together. Thank you very much.